then then what happens before then? You know, what happens, you know, but not only before they point now where I don't know what happens. I don't know what happens. Do I survive? Of religion by being douchebags. Because you know what happens when you use force and hate and anger to try and destroy even those who do want to leave? You know what happens to them? ISIS kills them. Of the United Civilizations of the Multiverse. Stories of, you know, what happens when the United Civilizations of the Multiverse.
What the American police are like. So if you're an average citizen in America, you know what happens when America...
At this point. Because I know where I'm headed. I know what happens at Act 2, and I kind of know what happens at Act 3, though. And obviously, I've read the book. I know what happens to him. But it's, damn it, Sean Bean, you're just brilliant, man. You just doesn't fucking matter, right? Okay, because you know what happens in women's bathrooms? They have fucking cubicles, right? If you've had a Donald Trump or someone, you know, what happens once you have had the head of state can't just say, you know what, we're doing this now. Because you know what happens? Next head of state can say, so the next, what happens after 4 years? What happens after 8 years? You know, what happens the next election? And this is actually quite a good thing for me, because you know what happens when you... I have to think about, like, okay, so what happens if we get post-guest? You know, what happens if we end stuff for fun? It's not my idea of a good time reading about, you know, what happens to rape victims. But currently, I don't think...
And then there's this stuff, and this stuff is effectively, like, the same sort of thing as, you know, what happens after the testosterone.
Which is essentially, you know, that essentially is, you know, what happens with fucking, the war on drugs, or indeed the war on... I know what happens at Act 2, and I kind of know what happens at Act 3, though I must admit, I think watching all these Doctor Who fan vids is...
We will perform a coup. Then you know what happens then? You know what happens? We bury you. We bury the fucking Labour Party. And I've been very open and...
We're not the Democrats. We do what we fucking like. So, you know, what happens then? What happens when you have a choice between... And you can call me a coward, you can call me a cuck. You know what happens if you do that? You just fucking... Businesses going towards the 1%, the economy stagnates, and people starve and die. And you know what happens when people starve and... The head of state can't just say, you know what, we're doing this now. Because you know what happens? Next head of state can say...
Than other ways you could be venting your emotion, because, hey, you know what happens if you play hatred and you really like it? You out there, okay, like, you know what happens. Okay, in Next Generation, they have seen the records from the...
Ned Stark, but he's Sean Bean, so we all know what happens to him. Poor Ned Stark. Poor noble stagnates and people starve and die. And you know what happens when people starve and people die? Do you know what happens? They get a bit sick of you. And you will end up in jail. And you know what happens in jail? You know this thing, this great and... And again, maybe we don't need to. Because maybe we know what happens when you harness that energy for good and have any nice gory descriptions for you to wank over, okay? I don't know what happens if I stop taking the pills. I just know I'm not.
And that actually leads to kind of a cool twist at the end, which I don't know what happens later on, but I'd like to learn him. He just goes around saving the day, and you know what happens every year? He goes back to...
I don't know what happens. I don't know what we do. I just know that we're...
Okay, we have this video here, do you want to pay for it? But you know what happens? Advertisers bid on the right to have advertising space on video.
Anyway, okay, you do not come to Britain and say, yes, I will axe murder everyone, because you know what happens? You get fucking arrested. Sexualities, and they are fine with it. Because you know what happens when you fucking have proper fucking immigration, when you... There are limits. Because you know what happens when you foster an ideology based... I'm saying, yeah, we're staging a revolution. You know what happens when you stage a revolution? You fucking live... And that the era of same old is at an end. I don't know what happens now. And I'm not going to be a...
Paedophile. Because you know what happens then? Paedophiles don't say, hey, I don't want a kid, I don't want
this, and I hope you get better. Because here's the thing, guys. You know what happens when you trust the establishment to just be better? I don't care. I really don't care. I know what happens to these people. Fucking get on with it. But when it came to
the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood and whatever myself, yeah. But I know what happens, and I'm very familiar with the gameplay, so it's like...
Hooks needing a sequel because, damn it, we need to know what happens to this person. No. Each film is a self-contained story, right?
It's beforehand that was undocumented, and we don't really know what happens then. Whatever. The point is, we haven't actually been around long.
Trans accepting. Stand by trans people. Do you know what happens? The two communities... as the good guys. I haven't done it as the vampires yet. But I know what happens if it goes to the vampires because I've seen Seastow put it in it, you know. Maybe it decides I'm fucking sick of your knees. You know, what happens then?
Because, ladies and gentlemen, I am a sci-fi writer. I know what happens when you meddle with technology.
I'm glad I know what happens to certain characters because certain characters are just
supporters, so he doesn't win the election, and if he does win the election, we will perform a coup. Then you know what happens then? You know what happens? Not read Neuromancer. You guys not seen science fiction? Do you not know what happens when companies get too fucking...
the big change in the storytelling, right? I essentially know what happens in this section. I just need to tell it well. Because guess what, guys? Do you know what happens if you do turn up on my doorstep and kick my door in and kill me? I know you're doxing me, but you shouldn't be doing that because it's wrong. And also, I don't give a shit, right? Do you know what happens? It's not like people then go,